Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying.
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon podcast and to an emergency transfer stream as some news about Arsenal's first summer signing, Martin Zubimendi. Fabrizio Romano, about an hour ago, said Arsenal's plans for midfield are confirmed. After Jorginho's exit, Martin Zubimendi will formally complete his €60 million move soon with medical and signature. Here we go, confirmed. And from the BBC as well, Martin Zubimendi is set for a medical at Arsenal, closing in on the Gunners in a proposed £51 million deal from Sami Mokbel. We've not had the on-bomb yet, but I'm sure it is coming. We are here to talk the deal, the player, what this means, what this looks like for Arsenal. And I'm here, as always, with my work husband, George Voutsas. Hello, sir.
Hello, good sir. How are you?
I am very excited. First signing. I was for there's another channel that I appear on occasionally called The Different Knock, and I'm currently making a video for it. Interesting. Not that I would ever plug that on this channel. But I was sort of basically I've written like priorities, and I was trying to get a sense of if I didn't know we were signing Zubimendi. Maybe this is a good place to sort of start the conversation. If you didn't know we were signing Zubimendi, and you were building a list of priorities for this summer, where would a 6'8" like Zubimendi come in? Like where in sort of in that list and ranking?
As usual, I start the morning off with Twitter arguments, and it was one of the biggest things. This is how I actually get dragged out of bed. It wasn't Alex; it was my Twitter arguments. And then Alex is like, "Can we stream?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." No, mate, look, it's a top 3 issue for Arsenal. In fact, I put it as far up as top 2. My biggest issue with Arsenal, and I would say that there's 3 major issues that I want fixed, just so I don't beat around the bush. Number 1 is turning high turnovers into quality shots. That is the number 1 issue. If you want the transitional inevitability buzzword, that is how you fix it. So that's number 1 priority to me. We're relegation form. Let's get that even to mid-table, and I think you can make Arsenal a completely different beast. Now, in terms of understanding tempo, the ability to gas pedal possession, our understanding of when to lean into chaos versus controlled possession is something that we don't necessarily fix. And, one little caveat that, by the way, it does help us with in build-up, which I think we've done a big job to solve this season, is his short passing centrally. Like, it's phenomenal. So it really does solve a little bit in build up on its own. But then I would say the last piece for Arsenal to solve, just as a whole, is going to be our level of box efficiency. I think that's something that I can't get around in terms of how we achieve that multiple different ways. But and it's not just clinical portions. Like, I think we have issues in terms of breaking down low blocks in the box consistently enough. And so those are my 3 major issues. And actually, Zubimendi fixes quite a bit in terms of the creativity aspects, in terms of breaking down those low blocks. One thing that I think is going to go very undernoticed in the Zubimendi deal, you're talking about a 6'8". I really want to highlight the 8 potential. Zubimendi, as far as his creative passing range and his ability to find solutions in tight spaces with a variety of passes, he is more Gundogan than Jorginho in certain aspects, and he is certainly more athletic than Jorginho. I still think fundamentally has that ultimate con in terms of he is somebody that will need spaces tight, undoubtedly. I don't want to get away that he's the perfect signing and, there aren't any cons. There are. I mean, if you have Zubimendi running back to goal, we've done so many scouted at this point on it, it's a problem. Like, you will want to cover your eyes. It's not something he's comfortable with. But as far as, some of the more physical, deep-lying playmakers go, people are going to say João Neves, they're going to say Joshua Kimmich. And Zubimendi, for me, has a lot more physical qualities than these players. So even though physicality is a weakness, he is the closest one or the most physical one that you're going to have towards that. So yeah, mate, I think this is a huge signing. And I kind of wanted to ask you, do you think that this signing is going to be underplayed in the broad sphere because of how long the supposed deal has gone on? And do you feel that this is a signing that is a big gun signing for you? Because that's been maybe the claim that I've seen, where it is a signing that we've known about, and Zubimendi's good, but he's not a major player despite every single club in world football wanting him in the last 18 months, which I find pretty strange.
Love it, George. Loaded question. Yeah, and that was kind of, do you think, by any chance? I do think that. I think actually we shouldn't underplay this as a signing just because of the fee, because I think it's a really good fee for a player of his quality. We'll talk qualities in a second, but also because, George, even the limitations that you mentioned, I think sometimes when we're talking about players, we want to find we want to not seem like the guy saying everything's great and everything's fantastic and he's great at this and this, that, and the other. So we can go two ways. We can kind of over-egg how good he is, or over-egg how bad certain things are. I think that happens as well. And Zubimendi, I was looking at his numbers earlier. We'll go more into his numbers later, but he's in the 76th percentile for interceptions, 71st percentile for blocks, 92nd percentile for clearances, 85th percentile for aerials won. This isn't just a sort of passing metronome. This is a guy who can hold his own physically. Yes, he has those limitations, but let's not go too far down that road and say we've signed an absolute bum in that sense, because we really haven't. And alongside Rice, there's a massive upside there. We'll look more at the numbers a little bit later. I wanted to come to a couple of things you said. So I think that the scout, firstly, we did a scout in January. So if you do want to go check that out, please do. You can do that as a free trialist on Patreon or as a YouTube member. We did back in January. We'll probably do another Zubimendi scouted, maybe, because we're going to do one tomorrow. So maybe we'll do another one. But yeah, it's a really, really exciting signing. And you mentioned it there, mate. Like headline, first and foremost, Real Madrid wanted him. Liverpool wanted him. I saw Barca links to him. I've seen Bayern links to him. Like, let's not. I hate this phrase because I don't think people mean it intentionally. But let's not deceive ourselves and think, oh, this is just a player that Arsenal had a free run at. No, we outmuscled Europe for this guy, and there is
including Madrid, by the way. Like that wasn't like I do. Look, I'm somebody that loves talking about the tactics, and we won't. Like, we'll give you some of the key things in this video. Like, we've already touched on it. I'm such a nerd. But one thing that I do sometimes need to work on, and I think that everybody needs to work on, is what the signing means contextually as a fan and emotionally. And I do feel, I'm sorry, mate, if every major team in Europe, the top 5 teams in Europe, recruitment-wise, are saying Zubimendi is somebody that we really want to prioritize at some point. Liverpool going to the point in which, yes, he did reject them. Madrid absolutely have been chasing Zubimendi for quite a while. And in fact, he's chosen Arsenal. These signings matter. Okay. Yep. And, I kind of went big on this even in the Rice transfer, because I thought that was a huge turning point for Arsenal, for a player, an elite talent, to choose Arsenal. And look, okay, the transfer fee isn't the same 100 million versus 150 or versus 55 million. But mate, this is the same logic in which a player who has been chased after for the entirety of Europe has chosen Arsenal. And, I think that's a huge step. And I just don't think you should just gloss over that as, the starting point. When we talk about the Florian Wirtz links for Liverpool, okay, it's not as flashy as a Wirtz, but Zubimendi absolutely, in terms of want, is where every major team in Europe. And I think for Arsenal, this has been my biggest point, because he solves a top 2 issue for Arsenal. He becomes a big signing. Like, it's an even bigger signing for Arsenal than it is for maybe other teams who have some version of that, because this is one of the biggest things that has affected us. And to see us so early do this is huge in that sense. And I will lead into this part. It is a rate limiting step to a forward signing who is likely to cost more. So getting this done now, early, off the bat, no fusses, is vital to our transfer window efficiency. You cannot seal this and expect the forward signing to happen soon, because that's bigger. It's a larger deal. It's going to affect more things. So getting these done first is key.
Yeah, I say this every summer, but order is not priority. And even though I would say this is right at the priority list, but order is never priority. We could go ahead and do 3 more deals before we get the forward. It doesn't mean we need them more than the forward. I also just want to pick up, before we come on to one of the headlines here, I want to pick up on something you said as well, because I think there's Zubimendi and there's Zubimendi and Rice. I think this is a really important point, that there's certain players, like there was an article that The Athletic put out recently talking about the sort of the growth of the combinations. So like, whether it's Jacob Murphy and Isak, or, Fernandez and whoever, like basically they went through sort of a lot of people's goals are coming from two players combining, and it's a combining trend. And that's not going to happen in terms of goals and assists. Maybe it will, who knows? But in terms of players who play alongside each other, play well alongside each other, it's a big thing. Let's just isolate the deal. I want to come back to the player himself in a second and talk more about him and look deeper into the numbers and get the tactics board up and stuff. But just as a deal, always with a pinch of salt, Capology has him on around 57,000 euros a week. So I think we could probably double that and still be happy, considering it's a first team player. He signed his deal for Sociedad in 2022, and he expired in 2027. I think the release clause is supposedly around 60 million euros. So that's about 51 million pounds. We sort of touched on it a little bit in terms of if this was at a 100 million pound signing, would we view this differently? Do you view that as really good value, as I do? Asking a George loaded question.
Yeah, it's I think it's going to be one of the better value deals of the summer. I don't think it's going to be the best. There's going to be others that are going to be better, but it's going to be one of the major value deals. I think when you're looking at a midfielder, let's just preface this with the description. Every major European team wanted you at some point in the last year, and you're leaving for 55 million. Off the bat, that's phenomenal. Then let alone what he solves for you and your team. I've seen midfielders go like that for 75 million pounds easily. So, I mean, to get him for what seems like 55 million pounds around there, I don't think we have the exact specifics of the deal quite yet, but it's around that ballpark, and we're amortizing it over 5 years. We're not paying that all in one go. It's not just been a simple release clause and dump. Like, I think that also is something that we need to talk about. I mean, Andrea Berta is the one that is organizing it to be released in different stages. And mate, like, I do think that that's already something I expected, but a difference in the Edu and the regime as far as that goes. Like, I mean, Edu famously got peddled for somebody that can only sign players with release clauses and showing up as far as doing that release clause. And I think that was a little bit of a disingenuous representation of Edu. But the point stands, like, people felt that way because at some point that's what he was doing as far as his remit. And here's an example of another release clause player in which Arsenal can show that they're doing something a little bit differently in terms of how they're able to complete the deal, and they have. So phenomenal in that aspect. And I can't wait to nerd over some of the specific tactical things. And of course, we've got the tactical board to talk about it. But I think that there is a lot of things in this deal that I go check. Like, if I had to rank this signing as far as value, as far as impact to Arsenal, addressing needs, being early, for God's sakes, the window isn't really even open. Mate, it's a 10 out of 10 signing. I don't think that you can. I actually won't have time for anybody that says that this is a negative signing. Now, that doesn't mean that the window is perfect and everything will be perfect. But I think this is the type of signing that you make in order to say Arsenal will be favorites for the Premier League or the Champions League. So it hits my box of the demand for this window. So I think legitimately 10 out of 10.
Again, it's always in conjunction. If it's Zubimendi and nothing else, it's similar to the Calafiori Marino situation last summer. Those deals look different compared to Zubimendi combined with other things that we definitely need to do. Let's move on to the numbers then. I'm going to bring up this one. So this is from the Lord and Savior of the Cannon podcast. A quick super chat from Y. Biggest knock-on effect on the pitch. Love from us. We'll definitely cover this. We're about to cover this. So I just don't want to interrupt the flow of this, but we're 100% going to cover this in the next section. Thank you so much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate that. Let's cover this from our Lord and Savior on this channel, George. You know who's coming. Scott Willis. And this is Martin Zubimendi in La Liga, 24-25, over 30-90. So good sample size. Again, we actually, in the deal section, we didn't mention the age either. 26, absolutely coming to his prime, which is fantastic. If you're listening, don't just look at it. I know. If you're listening, we've got loads and loads of stats that I don't necessarily want to go through each single one, but let's focus on the positives as they jump out here first. And I do want to caveat on the negatives. Again, I want to come back to this reputation that Zubimendi might have as this sort of soft touch Spanish midfielder, I don't buy personally. Certainly, if you look into the numbers, I think there's some running concerns, but that's a different thing to him out of possession. I think if you look at it in terms of his pass adjusted tackles, in terms of his dribble pass percentage, in terms of his tackle percentage, his aerial duel percentage, his aerial one percentage. Let's be specific about what the issue is. Could you break that down for us in terms of what your concern is? Because I think it's about when the spaces open up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think look, this is a player that over long distances doesn't have major acceleration. But in terms of in those first 5 to even 15 yards, incredibly snappy. And his idea is he follows the Jorginho mold of elite anticipation in order to get to duels earlier to when the duel comes so that he can be there, win it before it even becomes a problem. But he's 5'10". He's not some small person. And his tackling technique is incredible. Like, I think that he is very strong in the tackle. As far as letting people turn him, it's not something that he does often. I mean, when you were talking about that soft touch thing, it's not just that he gets to duels early. Like, I think he has a different level of physicality in the duel whilst he's competing than a Jorginho, which makes it even better. Now, I will say, as soon as somebody turns him, as soon as Zubimendi is running back to goal in terms of trying to catch up to play, that you're going to want to pull a blanket over your eyes for. He isn't fast in that aspect. But his speed of thought, his approach to a duel, the anticipation to getting to the duel, and then once he's physically in the duel, those fundamentals as far as tackling technique, not going to ground too early, standing strong, being able to mark your player off into removing an angle, putting his foot so that to make sure that he's not getting in between the legs and drawing a foul. He's very, very good at going cleanly for the ball and then transitioning into a possession that then speeds play for his team, and he makes the right decision after the duel, which is something that I really don't think Arsenal do often. In the transition inefficiency, yeah, I don't want to say names, but like in general, like part of the transition inefficiency problem is this idea that when we get a high turnover, our decisions in those high turnover lead to poor shots. And Zubimendi directly impacts our ability to get into better positions quicker because of his release of pass following that duel. So yeah, mate, like it is a problem. Let's not like run away from it. And I do think that the stats sometimes maybe this guy looks like an insane defensive midfielder. Yeah. Which I think like is slightly not accurate to play, but it also the critique has gone overboard. It's gone totally to the other end when it's like, this is the most physical deep lying playmaker you're going to find on the market. So yes, is it an issue? Yes. But he's the one that closest fixes it. So I don't know why it gets hung up on.
Yeah, and I've got some numbers to contextualize this as well in a second in terms of Real Sociedad's play, again, from our Lord and Saviour. I think the stuff that I love the most kind of can't be shown in the data, which is why this isn't just to plug the Scouted, but I think it's a really worth it as a Scouted. If you're ever going to do a Scouted, go and watch him in the numbers in the data. On the pitch. Jesus Christ, get your brain in order. On the pitch, I think it's really important. The stuff that I love with Zubimendi is the early decision making, the proactivity, the stuff that you're not necessarily going to see that crops up in the data in terms of progressive numbers or whatever, but a lot of it is situationally. He'll read something early, play an early pass, or switch it, or move it quicker than you might expect. He's kind of ahead of the play. He's got that Declan Rice thing where Declan Rice kind of has it out of possession. He has that just a fraction of a second ahead of the game in possession, which I think is something we really, really need. And just to contextualize these numbers as well, I'm just going to bring up these, which is, sorry, I wish I could have them both on the screen at the same time, but limitations. So this is Real Sociedad versus Arsenal in terms of the sort of team styles. So I want you to look at a number of things. Red is Arsenal, blue is Sociedad. Long pass attempts. So Sociedad go much longer. In terms of the field tilt, where they stand on the pitch, look where Sociedad are. In terms of how quickly they go towards goal, similar in terms of possession, but final third entries. Zubimendi will be doing very, very different things at Arsenal. So those types of radars are going to look quite different. And
Yeah.
actually, the stuff as we come on to maybe the tactical board, I'm more interested in how he solves certain stuff for us in terms of mid blocks and in the final third. So I'd love to sort of talk about that as we transition to the tactical board.
Could I do? Yeah, before we do, and I'm gonna put it up in the meantime as well. But I really want to address maybe if you could put up Remit the Frog, just because I've seen this a lot in terms of the Marino comparison, and I'm just going to address it really directly. Marino, and I maintain, even when he signed, we did have an issue where he had this unique ability that, when coming from ahead of the ball down, incredibly agile on the turn. But then when he's in deep build-up, he makes the wrong decisions. And we've been talking about that quite a bit recently on the podcast. This isn't the case with Zubimendi. As far as receiving on the half turn, receiving off the back foot, and trying to advance play with the game in front of him, Zubimendi has one of the quickest turns. And it's why I said, please stop saying the Jorginho comparison, because I don't think it's quite accurate. It is more Gundogan than it is a Jorginho. And that is how it's very different from Marino. So when you're talking about stats, duels, and challenges, one of the biggest things that you need to keep in mind is a really quick thing from a scouting perspective. Look, the duel numbers and the success is one thing, but how you compete in a duel is going to determine whether or not something's transferable to another league or not. So, I mean, yes, you compete and win duels in different ways. You know, people are tall in different ways. However, the manner in which you're able to use your height, the manner in which you're able to use your physical gifts determine whether or not you're going to be successful. And I think Marino, especially for the context of how we're going to play, is very, very different here. And I think that you need to look at them very differently, despite saying the whole Twitter narrative of Sociedad midfielder that we just got and all the weaknesses that I see with Marino is going to be the same with Zubimendi. I think that's not fair.
Yeah, I think we learned our lesson really with Marino. Well, certainly, I learned my lesson with Marino in terms of I look to those dual numbers and you go, wow, but then it's what happens next is the big question. Once you win that, or once you don't win that, how do you respond? I think it's a big question of Marino, and it's different with Zubimendi. Let's go on to the tactics board. I've heard you mention how you feel that this is going to be. Tyler Blake says, live pod while I get ready for work. W day. I hope you have a W day at work, Tyler. A work day. W, get it? I've heard you mention how you feel this is a transition thing to Arsenal becoming a double pivot team. I'd love you to give you some airtime to sort of explain that. I still think we're going to see sometimes with Rice push up the pitch and maybe Zubimendi alongside of Miles, whatever it might be. But yeah, how do you see this playing out with Zubimendi? As we transition over here.
Yeah, and so really quickly, I've talked about us being really a double pivot team. Why? Because I mean, Zubimendi, let's have it right. He's going to be somebody that you can see in this iteration where when Miles comes in, I think you see a really beautiful transition into a 3-4-3 option here. This excites me quite a bit because I think that there's a lot of potential in this type of lineup. I think you've got two lateral shuttlers in this diamond, in Miles and in Rice, who are both phenomenal box-to-box people that are able to occupy the team at different heights. And one thing that I do think that we will see at points as well is going to be this kind of more traditional transition in which we see this kind of 4-2-4 occur in our press. And you're going to see these two operate in a very traditional pivot, where you're going to see the team press high and have enough athletes at the back where the distances between both the front line and the back line are going to be quite small. So immediately, those are some transitions that I think we'll see quite a bit of. Now, alternatively, one thing that I think we can see without Miles, and I know people are saying I'm taking out my son, but this is another iteration I'm pretty excited for, potentially. And it's when you have a Calafiori that's able to come in, and this kind of setup is something that I think we could see in certain moments where Zubimendi could be functioning higher, much in the same way that we saw Jorginho function with Declan Rice in that period last year between January and March. Or sorry, not March, probably more towards May. But this idea, especially, I'll call it the Liverpool role. There was a game against Liverpool last year in which Jorginho was the higher 8. This is a guy that can equally be very good in the press, and then having somebody like Rice and Calafiori two runners to go and support this is going to be key, because I think there's going to be moments in which Calafiori can hold the width and you're going to see Martinelli able to come inside. But Zubimendi as a 6'8" is somebody that can protect this zone quite well. You've got a phenomenal duel winner in Gabriel, who's going to cover the channel brilliantly, better than really anybody in Europe. But Zubimendi in these high areas, his intelligence in terms of finding solutions centrally to break lines, or to have a ball maybe over the top when Kai can peel back post, having this as a through ball, being able to even sometimes in really tight situations, by the way, when Martin Odegaard kind of drops deep and you've got, our fullbacks trying to come maybe on the overlap here and Saka comes inside, Zubimendi being able to drift centrally and find solutions in tight areas. This is something that I feel he has the flexibility for. So in total, you're looking at a player that's got a lot of utility, both higher up as a potential 8, but then I'll put everybody back again, because I think my favorite iteration is going to be the 3-4-3, just to end on and show people. So when you've got something like this, and I think you're going to have Zubimendi be one of the first kind of people receiving in the middle third here. Sorry, just going to redo this. This is probably something that we'll see a lot more of next season. And what this does is it means that Zubimendi's the middle third control in this entire zone between here and here. Martin Odegaard should not be receiving and dropping into these pockets. So you're going to see a Martin Odegaard able to float across the pitch here in that number 10 position quite a bit more, because, mate, this as a middle 6, I would call, between Gabriel, Saliba, Timber, Rice, Zubimendi, and Miles, is probably one of the best in Europe as far as transition controls. So it really gives freedom to our attackers, that front four, to really do what they want, have the freedom to do what they want. And I'm hoping that's what we see as kind of a knock-on effect that maybe we quite haven't seen as much of, from Arsenal in general.
I like the drifting. I think a lot what you said about Zubimendi in terms of finding high solutions is really exciting. Something we didn't touch on, which I'll come to in a second, about Rice, but I think with Odegaard, like, we're talking about what the role is, but as the tip of the diamond, who is a bit more free, who can drop out either side kind of situation, there's something I'm interested in there, certainly with Odegaard, because we have been talking about how this role works when we've seen a lot of his best work in the last, say, 2 seasons coming sort of in that role that Zubimendi we think will now take. If he can have a higher, yes, but freer role, moving him out those central areas where we think he can be pushed off the ball, there's something there for sure. I'm certainly more creativity. The other part I wanted to come to was Rice, which we maybe didn't discuss there. You had him on the right, or sort of pushed, stick him over. You pushed him to the right. What knock-on effect do you think that has in terms of on Saka, on him? Do you think he might be better on the right, or the angles might suit him better? Because I think that's an interesting sort of almost another knock-on effect of Zubimendi. Just pull us up a touch, just because it was like, perfect. Thank you, mate.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that why I've actually had Rice here is because this whole flexibility that Rice has had in terms of getting into higher areas of the pitch and the solutions he can find. Rice is more right-footed dominant. I think when the left, he's better in terms of receiving in deep build-up off the left, Rice. But in terms of going high, to make use of his runs necessarily and use the idea that he can crash the box, he's far better in terms of using his strong foot. And I think a lot of it has to do with his ability to turn. One of my biggest frustrations, by the way, has been this version of Arsenal where we see this. Okay, Declan Rice for me is not somebody that in these high positions can turn in the pocket agilely. Like, the best thing for Rice to do, by the way, is not coming deep like this as a high 8. It is from arriving in deeper areas forward. That run is what is key. So having Miles be the one, by the way, to do those things, and then giving the freedom for the pivot to basically operate, whoever's on the ball side steps up. This is the biggest change that I think not a lot of people are talking about. So when Kai is the reference, for example, and let's say the ball is up here, and if the ball's off onto the left, you're going to see everybody shift kind of across. Zubimendi is going to cover up, but it gives space for Rice, by the way, to really exploit this third man run in the box. Okay. Now, when the ball's on the other side, This means that we switch, right? Odegaard probably drops a little bit deeper. Saka holds his width. If Rice has the ball here, it means that Miles can be the one that's a little bit higher up in terms of receiving. It does mean, by the way, sometimes Miles won't always do that because, again, these iterations aren't black and white, but Zubimendi may step up.
Yeah.
Miles may drop in. The flexibility here is what excites me because then you've now got a high-touch player who's right-footed that can feed a Gabriel Martinelli who more naturally wants to make that out-to-in run. And immediately you see quite a bit of solutions because even Saka peeling back post, mate, Havertz peeling into the front post for movement, Zubimendi has options. This is what this opens up for me. And, you know, I think that when you talk about this Declan Rice on the left versus the right, I think in right central midfield, he finds better solutions as an 8 than he does on the left because sometimes the left central midfielder is higher than the right central midfielder, generally speaking.
I agree, and I think some of my big frustrations have been watching from the clock end or the North Bank, watching Rice just unable to deal with those angles, and when you're sat on that end, you see specifically how limited he can become. I think the exciting part of this is like, you can put sort of, you know, we do obviously do scouted episodes where we sort of put people into the team and you go, okay, and it feels like a little bit of like, okay, well, to get him in his best positions, we might have to move him into a slightly uncomfortable position and he might have to be a little bit uncomfortable. But it feels like with Zubimendi, putting him in, I think it benefits Rice. I think it benefits Odegaard. I think it benefits Miles. I think it benefits Havertz, Saka, and Martinelli in terms of the freedoms. There's a lot of knock-on. I think that's really actually the part I'm quite excited about, in the same way that you said you were excited about how we were going to attack differently with Rodrigo. You weren't actually excited about the player, but it is like the actual impact, the impact on the rest of the players is kind of one of the big selling points here, I think.
Okay, I think this is going to sound confusing. He simultaneously, because let's have the Odegaard discussion. We have to, right? And I think he simultaneously puts major pressure on Odegaard, whilst at the same time giving him the best opportunity to thrive. And that can be a very contradicting statement for some, because why? Martin Odegaard, at his best, we've seen what he's been able to do. Even in his periods of poor form, he has been somebody that has been the middle third orchestrator or conductor for this Arsenal team for quite a while, right? And Zubimendi walks in and is better than Martin Odegaard at that, factually. There's nothing to debate about that. He will become the conductor in the middle third. Now, what that does is, yes, it forces Martin Odegaard to be higher in the pitch, receiving higher in the pitch, having a little bit more freedom where he doesn't have to drop in. So, yes, you know, in terms of Tipsy saying the Odegaard-Zubimendi paradox, that will exist. There will be a competing like role there that Zubimendi will win. However, I'm going to put this as a caveat. Look at Martin Odegaard's best time in La Liga in terms of his partnership with Isaac. He was more of a traditional 10. And the irony is, for Arsenal, we've seen him struggle in that role. So there is this thing where I said I've seen in his career he's been a successful 10, and he can do it, by the way, when he releases quickly, when he does some of the things that we've talked about. I don't think it's as cut and dry that Martin Odegaard in 10 won't succeed, even though for Arsenal we haven't seen it, and that is true. Yeah. But I do think that it does give him almost a platform. This is going to sound really harsh, but a rope to hang himself with, playing wise, right? Because it removes his, you know, alternative utility. He can't rely on dropping out of the block to then dictate the middle third because, mate, it's covered, it's good. Yep. So when you're not performing there, then it will force these other conversations. And I'm sorry, mate, like we've got a plethora of 10s, right? And that, to me, is where the most exciting aspect of this is. Your Fabio Vieira, what is that? Is he still here? I don't know. But your Max Daumans, your Ethan Waneris, these are all different types of 10 that, again, would thrive with a more clear pivot in the back. This is why it excites me so much. The 4-2-4, the 3-4-3, we have basically freed the 10 to be a true 10. This is the biggest movement of that. So when you're doing those things, and you mention those types of 10s that we've got, it forces Martin Odegaard to kind of adapt or die in a certain extent. Yeah. And I'm excited for that. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he dies. So that is something where I'm at.
It's not. And our job is not, I hope people don't think any discussion of Odegaard on this channel becomes we're trying to kill him. We're trying to find solutions, and this is a potential solution. And my big reservation about it was if you put Odegaard as a 10 in those central zones, in those compact spaces, up against physical Bruno Guimaraes, he's going to die, guys. But if he has a bit more freedom, he has a bit more time to release, etc. I think also just kind of contextually, like this is all quite tactically sort of complex on some level. Having Odegaard higher, freer, more time could completely change his story at Arsenal. So this is massive, and I it's really exciting in many different aspects. But I think really for me the takeaway from that is the knock-on effect of Zubimendi is one of the most exciting parts, as well as he himself. And I think he'll get more numbers. You know, what does a Miles Lewis-Skelly 10-goal season look like with a Zubimendi? So that's it's exciting.
Mate, I do really want to pick up on something that you said that I think is really smart. That's going to go unnoticed though. We had this whole discussion about Declan Rice. Okay, one of the biggest things that I do want to highlight at the end of this is the transition with Kai Havertz in midfield. People don't want to hear it, and actually, we get a super chat from O'Malley just as I'm about to make this point in terms of who could be at the tip of that diamond. And yes, it absolutely could be Kai, especially when we talk about a very different type of, striker up there. And now that is where I'm excited, because it no longer means Rice is the one in the high 8. It means that truly a second striker profile can be the high 8 when we want to do that. So for those specific games, that means that we have just a better utility of Rice. And so when Rice is an 8, it's exclusively for games that were in transition that allow him to run with space into the box. No longer will we see the whole Rice in high 8 dropping in and, being that weird high 8 position that, again, isn't Rice. So from my perspective, you're looking at the Rice 8 shouts to basically occur in your Newcastles, your Liverpools, your top 6 games with some speed. Nottingham Forest, by the way, big transition games that there are spaces. However, when you're talking about those stubborn blocks that we struggle to break down, the West Ham, the Fulhams, the mid blocks, those things where we've struggled to break through centrally, doesn't mean that I've got Rice as a high 8 anymore. I've got options of Zubimendi. I've got options of Kai Havertz crashing late into the box. It means I've got people that are more suited to do midfield things in higher positions and in pockets to do them. And so for me, those are the biggest knock-on effects from Zubimendi, generally speaking, that I think it's important to talk about, because I think it solves so many different holes indirectly. So I'm really happy with that.
Yep. Opens up pathways for one area as well in terms of minutes, and that sort of almost more customizable 10 position, whether it's a second striker or a one area or an Odegaard or even a Dowman or whatever behind a Zubimendi and Rice in different combinations. It's a lot of options. We've got some super chats. We'll do those, and then we'll come to as many questions as we can to get your questions in before we finish, probably about 10 minutes or so. Brian Holiday, thank you for your super chat. What do you think of Thierry's comments on the process? It's now or never for Arteta. I might have had more patience if he'd won a cup recently. I haven't seen the episode from my paymasters Sky, so I don't know. But I can't particularly comment. I think what he said was we should have won a cup by now. Honestly, I can't disagree with that. We should have been better in the cup competitions. It's not really I don't see why that's particularly controversial.
Yeah, I will say this. I think Thierry's been critical of Mikel in like quite a bit. So I think maybe there's some people that are angry about that. I just don't think that there's anything wrong that's been said right now. Personally, I think everybody in the cold light of day can agree. Should we have won more cups? Should we have done better in the cups? We should have. And then it's look, this is actually probably a better conversation. This whole thing that he said and demand, by the way, is something Mikel has done too. But next year is the year for major honors. And if we don't, there's going to be serious conversations about what went wrong. Because next year, there isn't a way to hide behind the Arsenal should win a major honor. And I think that's the point that a lot of people are making.
I think so. And a lot of people are protecting, let's say, Mikel or the project, whatever it might be. By the way, Mikel would agree with that. If Mikel was on that podcast, he'd be like, yeah, we should have won. Like, it's not, do you know what I mean? So I think also with Thierry, like, I obviously have a lot of time for him as a player, obviously, because he's our greatest ever player. But I also have a lot of time for guys who he's been critical, but he's also been quite supportive, and he finds meaningful ways of impact. Like he spoke to Saka before the Real Madrid game and stuff like that. He's finding meaningful ways of being involved that aren't just William Gallas in the media saying we need to go and sign whoever. Like he's actually impacting the team in a positive way. So I have a lot of time for him in many different respects.
Yeah.
Hossein says, would this signing work with a Gyökeres? Your favorite player, George?
Yes. I think any channel running 9 would thrive with this. Like, again, Zubimendi unlocks the freedom in the final third quite a bit. Oh, God, please, I want to do it quite a bit. But yeah, any channel running 9 would fit beautifully. I mean, the whole idea of Kai Havertz being at the tip of a diamond, by the way, it requires your number 9 to be a mover that can overload in wide areas. Again, that kind of overlap on the left-hand side with Gyökeres filling in on the left, which we've seen quite a bit of him being able to operate out wide, leaving the space for Kai Havertz to, come on through as a second striker role. Yeah, it works beautifully in tandem. So again, I've never felt that the profile striker that we've looked at is a problem. I just put Gyökeres lower on the list because I have more concerns and more flaws I associate with him as opposed to other names. But in terms of profile, 100% works. By the way, so does Isaac, Ollie Watkins, Benjamin Sesko, Gyökeres. They all work for the same role and the same reason.
Yeah. With more freedom in terms of who and where the 10 is, I can see different combinations working. I also look. I know he's 15. I know he is, but Mikel is first naming and talking up Max Dowman. Like we have to think about what that might look like by, let's say, the end of next year. So let's see.
I am holding when I hold back, there's something to be said, but I will say I can't any longer in the preseason. We're gonna have to talk about it, mate.
Mikel's first naming him. Like I think I have my concerns, but ultimately the club are platforming him. So and we're we support and talk about the club, so we have to talk about him. I really love to see Kai at the tip of the diamond. Yeah, I think we discussed that a little bit earlier, but absolutely, I think Kai as a kind of second striker. He also is something we haven't necessarily talked about. Is something we spoke about in the main podcast, which you can check out that came out yesterday. The lack of legs in this midfield is slightly concerning as a group, not necessarily individually, but as a group. And I think Kai spending more time in midfield might go some way to solving that. I would love a signing personally. We spoke about Lazio Gachukwu, Carlos Baleba is going to be way too expensive, but those types of guys who are big space, big legs would be lovely.
We'll have to speak further along, but I genuinely feel that the whole Partey extension links to this with Kai Havertz being in midfield is going to be we need to band-aid this, and it only is acceptable by doing the extra mile in the forward department. You know what I mean? Like I would go one step further and saying if we didn't do the legs in midfield, it has to actually have a knock-on effect of another signing. I know this might be demanding, but if you don't do it and you're saying, listen, Partey as an extension and Kai Havertz in midfield, okay, fine, I'll get on board. I don't think it's right. I don't personally agree with it. I would prefer to get a signing and move on from that point. But I can almost swallow it if it means another signing in the forward department. Because look, mate, we've kept Lukunga, by the way. He was going to run out. He was off. So I think for you to re-sign that is probably a sellable asset there. And, you're looking at things and moves to say, okay, we're going to patchwork this hole that we know is a hole. But that only makes sense, mate, if you do the subsequent thing of an additional signing, right, in the forward areas. And by the way, a left wing or a winger, a true winger and another forward were the minimums. So if you're going to patchwork one signing, that means do the third. And I think that's the step that people have been so frustrated with last year and in general, because Arsenal have made moves that you can say, let me squint to make this work, but then they didn't follow through with the making it work part, because it's okay, fine, I'll agree to it and your creative solution, but you have to use that because you're creatively finding room in other areas. You can't just say, I'm doing this to squint to make it work and then not address another squad hole. That's the biggest issue.
I agree on that case. And look, there's like 2 or 3 things in the squad that are just like, we just don't have it. And therefore there's not even a debate about whether we could sort of aggregate it, but we could probably aggregate maybe certain things in the team, or we could maybe not go and get a right centre back, right back prospect, or whatever it might be. But we're just getting to a point where now it's like, why? Like, why are we half measuring anything? Because other teams don't. So like we have to be careful not to fall too much into, well, I can think of a solution, but it doesn't matter if you can think of one, because like we're so used to that, aren't we? Alex, where's your mining show later? Yeah, I'm getting on the boat. Why are we keeping Lokonga, says Nathan. And someone says Lokonga has legs. I'll be honest, I think that's probably to sell him, I would guess. But again, it's like you could keep Lokonga, he could play some minutes. But when there are talents like Ugachukwu or even at Villa, I look at Villa, right? Like they need to sell. And they have Onana and Tielemans and Kamara and even Rodgers and stuff. I'm not saying they're all perfect players. Joe Bellingham is a player I've looked at. I'm not saying any of these are perfect solutions, but like Lokonga is just such like it's such a you won't get this reference. It's such an Aldi Lidl solution. Would you get that reference in Canada? Aldi Lidl. We want a Waitrose solution. Let's do 2 more questions, not including this one. Any update on Draxler, says Scooby Doo. Not that I've heard. David Rogers, that is quite a funny thing. Wenger out, says David Rogers as well. Let's do 2 more questions before we close out. Any catching your eye, Georgie boy? Should we do a Watkins scouted? Maybe we can talk about that.
I definitely think we should do a Watkins scouted at some point. Like I think we've done so many Zubimendi ones. I'm more than happy to do it again. Maybe a quick poll in the chat. People, just if you could spam which one you would prefer. Would you like a new scouted on somebody like an Ollie Watkins, or would you like us to again revisit Zubimendi? Keep in mind we've now done 2. I'm more than happy to give what the people want. But yeah, I think Ollie Watkins could be something interesting.
But he's 30 in December, George. Louis Gerard, what do you guys think about Alvarez?
Yeah, so Alvarez, in terms of that's a competing idea with Rodrigo. It's another second striker type of profile, and it's somebody that you would pair with like a taller Kai Havertz and another bigger kind of striker position. I just think he's crazy expensive, and it's just lazy linking. I do think that Arsenal are after a Jesus replacement in profile fundamentally, and it's this idea that of somebody that can play wide but is a second striker. Who also fits into that mold? Bryan Mbeumo, and it's somebody that's a much better price for me. That mold of striker, it's the Trossard Jesus redundancy. Okay, you move on those 2, it opens up potentially a third signing that is more of a second striker / wingery type of midfielder or attacker, right? It's just a forward player that can operate on the wings but also inside centrally, and that's gonna happen with kind of sales, in my opinion, from both Jesus and Trossard. But that's what Alvarez would solve in a different way, right? And Rodrigo does it again in a different way, which we talked about on previous scouted. Long-winded way of saying I love Alvarez the player. I'm not spending 90 million to address that squad hole that for me isn't huge, So if we're gonna do it, operate in the 50 million pound range, and if we're doing that, Bryan Mbeumo is your guy.
Bryan Mbeumo. We've got too much hair in this team. That's what I say.
If he had hair, he'd be 75 million pounds.
Let's finish there. Thank you all for being here. Zubimendi, we hope will be confirmed relatively soon. It's a really good bit of business, really exciting. If you want to go check out, if you've sort of joining us now and you missed the rest of the podcast, go back. We spoke about him from a deal perspective, from the data, from the numbers, from sort of a tactical aspect, and we'll obviously talk about loads more over the course of the summer. But yeah, a really important statement of intent from Arsenal. I think these are the sorts of deals that, I always talk about the year 6 party analogy, or the kindergarten party analogy. Who's going? If he's going, then I'll stay. And if he's staying, then I'll stay. And if you're going, then I'll go. And some of it, you just need people to start committing. And I think having that at the top of the summer as a statement of Arsenal saying we've gone and got one of, if not the most coveted 6-8 options on the market for a good price to solve specific issues that we have that have massive impacts on other players in our team, alongside things, and we're not done, obviously, hopefully, please. I think it's a very, very good statement of intent, and yeah, well done, Arsenal, for getting it done.
Yeah, mate, it's phenomenal on so many things. Look, big takeaways. If you've sat through almost 50 minutes, thank you. We love you. Thank you for your support. But also, I think the biggest takeaways from a Zubimendi perspective is you've now got a middle third controller for the team. You're gonna see flexibility where I would really encourage people not to talk about him purely in the Jorginho sense. He's more Gundogan in that he has many solutions higher up the pitch, both centrally. He's going to speed up the buildup in terms of some of those short passing and ensuring the central progression's good. He's going to really help platform other players. I don't think that we're going to see Declan Rice used in the same way that platforming is going to be a topic with Zubimendi and the Odegaard effect, where Odegaard will absolutely be asked to play higher up the pitch and operate more as a 10 and be more responsible for getting those goals. I don't think he will make a do or die platforming for Odegaard. I don't think it confirms that Odegaard will die, but it will necessarily ask the question. And when we talk about Zubimendi affecting Rice and changing positions, he will affect him in the 8, more so on the right than the left, which will in turn cause Kai Havertz to be more of your second striker in midfield. That's the iteration that I see us tactically using Zubimendi. So big Swiss Army knife, 55 million pounds for one of the best 6'8s in the world that was chased by every single major club in Europe. Arsenal, check. That's a brilliant way to start to do the window. Now, let's continue. Let's push through. This isn't the end, but very good start.
And it's a good name. Zubimendi. Martin Zubimendi. He passes the name check. George, final thing, the most important part. What number for Zubimendi at Arsenal? 3's available. 5 might become available. Depends what happens with Partey. What are you going for? I feel like you just do not care.
I don't care whatsoever.
Give him 3. Give him 3. We've got another Scouts episode, which it will be one of, I think we've done a Mbeumo one, so maybe a Watkins one. We're also looking at Gordon, depends what the links are, but we're going to have another one out for you guys tomorrow. We've got TCP Live coming out tomorrow as well, and then obviously the main podcast as well. But also through the summer, we're going to be doing much more of these sort of impromptu streams. So stick us on your notifications. If you have you've got to subscribe, but also stick your notification stuff on as well. You can always watch them live or watch them back. Going to try and be a little bit more agile in terms of just getting streams out when news drops. Thank you all so much for being here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you become a Patreon or YouTube member to get access to ad-free content, exclusive content, loads of stuff on the Cannon podcast, and loads to come through the summer. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple. Thank you, George.
Thank you, good sir.
Thank you so much for watching, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.
Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying.